Hi everyone, welcome to ArtsFest Online and to this evening's book launch for the Wrenna. We will be joined by the book's author R.M. Francis and his fellow Black countryman poet Lee Armstrong and writer Paul MacDonald. If you have any questions for our speakers, please use the Q&A box and we'll go through them at the end. And just a quick reminder that this event is being recorded and as it is a public platform, please don't share any confidential information. So welcome everyone, and over to you, Rob.
Thanks very much, Claire, and big thanks to Claire and the ArtsFest Online team for hosting us this evening, and a huge thanks to you guys for tuning in to join us to celebrate the launch of the Wrenna, which came out on Tuesday with Wild Press Books. It's my second novel with Wild Press Books, and we're going to kind of, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about its conception and some of the ideas around what's involved in the book. And we're also going to be treating you guys to some great Black country literature with my special guests for this evening as well. So the Wrenna is a strange little book about a strange but rich and beautiful place, the Wren's Nest in Dudley. And it was my home for 6 years. It's an old housing estate that wraps around a protected nature reserve that's full of lush flora and fauna and full of geological heritage and geological wonder. It's where they pulled the Dudley bug from the ground. It's fossil rich and limestone rich grounds are a real haven for geologists across the globe. But it's also got this sort of haunting remains of industry there as well. Caves and bell pits and old tracks. So this kind of domestic and mundane and everyday sphere shares this odd space with the rural and with the industrial. And all of this comes together, creating a sort of off-kilter and endlessly fascinating genius loci. And one that's fairly typical to the Black country as well, where we see these places of green and grey coming together in unusual ways. There's two other things that the Wrenna is known for. One is that generations of the same family and families live within streets of each other. So there's a really kind of tight-knit sense of community on the estate. And indeed, where I was living was only sort of 4 roads up from where my great-grandmother lived and where my grandfather was raised. So I ended up living on the same streets as on the estate where my dad and his brother would knock about, and where, you know, several generations of my family grew up and made their home. And this is then kind of contrasted, this sense of togetherness and family and community is sort of contrasted with its reputation for gang-related antisocial and criminal activity. So it's another really interesting kind of clash that we get in the area. And weirdly, these things tend to sort of go hand in hand as well, that part of the rich and deep set sense of community is because it's dangerous for outsiders in some way, or at least perceived as dangerous for outsiders as well. Every street on the Wrenna is named after a plant or a bush or a tree of some sort, and I've used this in my novel. Each of the set pieces or each of the separate flash fictions are named after each of the streets on the estate. And I've weaved in some interesting bits of plant folklore throughout the pieces as well. And this seemed to me to be a really interesting kind of symbol and metaphor for the sort of rhizomes and the roots of place identity, of community, of family, of memory, of those weird things that are always there but are difficult to trace. And so that sort of metaphor and symbol is at the heart of the novel as well. And that sense of the unseen and that sense of folklore and folk magic weaves its way in as a sort of echo of these haunting industrial nuts as well. And indeed that sense of menace and threat in the region too. So as the story and the ideas develop, this sense of loss and this sense of haunting and the sense of upheaval kept coming back. So what we get in these pages is the story of a man who's returned, having done naval service in the armed forces, and he's returned home considering his early formative experiences as a young man and as a boy, now returning to a place that's changed, that's got cold, that got dark, where that sense of threat and upheaval is disrupting the fabric of the place. So at its heart as well, there's a sort of archetypal story in some ways going on of the hero facing down the foreign invader, or the hero facing down the alien force of some sort, and indeed one of searching into the darkness for lost shadows of selfhood. And so that really is the kind of the meat and the muscle of the Wrenna, and I'm looking forward to sharing some more of that with you at the back end of tonight's session. But before all of this, I want to invite and introduce you to my special guests for this evening. Two of my absolute favourite writers and two of my absolute favourite people, and people that I'm very, very proud to call mates as much as colleagues. Our first reader this evening is a really brilliant Black Country poet and weird fiction writer, straight out of the Joel Lane School of Writing, who delves into the dark beauty of the Black Country, its edgelands, its underlands, its oubliettes. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Lee Armstrong.
Cheers, Rob. Thanks. Really excited about the book, Rob. Congratulations. Really looking forward to hearing you read something later on as well. I'm going to kick off with a poem called Wrought myself, which was in the Places of Poetry book, and part of that kind of project where everybody got to pin a poem at the place where they live, and obviously I pinned one for the Black Country, and fortunate to have it included in this book. So I'm going to start off with that. This is called Wrought. It's how that we're born and bred different round here. We ain't born and bred at all. We're wrought, mined from pit and quarry, 2 parts iron, 1 part grit, die cast and drop forged, we're baby-showed in sparks, our saft jeds wetted with slurry, baptised in cut water, we're nussed on coal dust and spit, then oily ragged and homoured, knocked into shape in factory and foundry, tempered in a furnace that's always fired up. We're stamped with words that tell all on them, where we was made. It's how that we're born and bred different round here. We ain't born and bred at all. We're wrought. I'm going to share a piece now. Me and Rob have spoke about this before. I know Rob's touched on the Wrenna and, you know, community and people living on the Wrenna. And I think we've said before, my nan probably knew your nan or your great nan, you know, because my nan lived on the Wrenna as well. And I think you shared this poem on one of your websites, which was one of the first things that I kind of got out there. This is called Nan Sunday, and it is about my nan who lived on the Wrenna. It's called Nan Sunday because we used to go and visit her on a Saturday, funny enough, which sounds a bit of a strange thing. But at one time, I presume we used to visit her on a Sunday, and that name kind of stuck. So this is called Nan Sunday. We never minded the misnomer. To us, she was always Sunday, Nan Sunday, licensed to make tea. But it was Saturday afternoons we strained uphill in one of Dad's asthmatic bangers Starts first time, just needs the right amount to choke. A cargo of fish and chips and a doorstop loaf from Sings. Wheezing our way to the top of the Wrenna, the streets receded into quarry, a limestone bald patch in a comb over of council houses. Wren's Nest was reserved for the anoraks, fossil hunters and nature walkers who perform strange rituals on rocky outcrops. By the time we stopped, she'd be in the doorway, head bobbing above the privet, moon-faced, cheeks a watercolour pink, guardian of the last bastion of carbolic soap and the beef dripping PC, keeper of the crocheted doily. We watched the wrestling while the grown-ups stitched tales of people we barely knew, like characters in some half-forgotten book. Every sentence a black country sulphur, Dobe Koryo Gudegi, language bent out to shape, hammered by tongues on time-old anvils. Whistled by the kettle, she'd disappear into the kitchen, where a sink full of white soaked for eternity. Return with a fistful of china, fingers thick as sausages, forearms that could carry anchors, a teapot carrying a teapot. We got the call on a Sunday night, as if she had a point to prove. 1,000 shibboleths laid to rest, compressed in memory. But I go there often these days, a sudden craving for grey pays, or trilobite words that fall from the cake hole like crumbs. I'm going to share a little bit of prose. This is called Briar Hill, and it's from a collection that I've been working on for like far too long, and I keep dipping in and out of it. And Briar Hill is a fictional town in the Black Country that may or may not be related to Briar Hill, where I used to live. So I'll let people make their own mind up about that. But it's inspired by two bridges at the bottom of, if you know St Andrew's Church or Netherton Church, the bank at the bottom of, the bridges at the bottom of the bank. And it's just one of those places when you pass through, so I normally pass through on the way to Salt Wells, it's just got a really strange kind of feeling about it. But this is called Briar Hill anyway. They say that places have a pulse. They live and breathe like people. I suppose that's true, but it runs deeper than what you can see on the surface. That's all just superficial, cosmetic. No matter what streets and buildings you tattoo onto the skin, you can't change what's underneath. Not really. The Romans had a name for it, although, like so many words, we've long since trampled on the true meaning. They called it genius loci, or spirit of place. I'm not talking about the community spirit you find in the local Derby and Joan club, or the sense of place you get from the tower blocks and the shuttered high street. Don't get me wrong, they can be part of it. I suppose you could say that one inevitably feeds the other, but this is something different, vast and immutable, at the same time indistinct, fathomless. They say the devil's in the detail. I don't know about that. I don't think you're giving him enough credit. Maybe he's everywhere else too. One thing I do know, there's more to a place than meets the eye. Strip it all away, the towns and the cities and the people, and you're still left with something visceral, as real as you and me. It's in the ground and in every mouthful of air that gets sucked into the lungs. It purifies or defiles everything depending on its nature. And whatever it is, a spirit, a soul, the devil himself, sometimes it's darker than anything you could ever imagine. If you want to know what the soul of Briar Hill is like, don't head for the towns or the sprawling housing estates that surround it. Chapel Ash, Blackmore, the Widows. Start at the canal instead. Look down from the bridge at the coal black ribbon below. That's where I found it. Around here, they call it the cut, like an open vein. Stare at it long enough and you'll see it. The raised hackles on the surface, the shadows that shift beneath, churning the silt. You can hear it in the bristling of the reeds, whispers even when the wind drops and the air grows still. There's something in the darkness, biding its time, slowing its pulse, waiting. My old man says I'm right and wrong about the cut. He talks about it sometimes when he's got the drink in him. That's the only time he talks much at all these days. Mum says he's puddled, has been for a long time, like most of the blokes around here. And if I listen to his saftness for too long, I'll end up puddled as well. He rubs off on you like ink. But he says this place will be dead as a doornail soon. There is no pulse, not anymore. The steady hiss and clatter from the factories along the towpath, well, that's just the death rattle. And whatever soul it once had, good or bad, was sold off years back, before I was born. It's like a cheery piece that I feel like I've got to move on to something maybe a bit happier. This is a bit of a nostalgic one. It's called One Last Fire, and it's basically about that the last day of the school holidays, just before or just as you're on the like kind of cusp of adolescence, and you know you're going out for that last like kind of adventure. And where I used to live, obviously we always had the canals to kind of retreat to and you know disappear into. So this is called One Last Fire, and it's about that like kind of last day of the 6 weeks holiday. Those 6 weeks unspooled like fishing line, a tangle of days for the pick and pull of tale tellers, spinners of yarns in gasping classrooms. We squirmed like worms on hooks, dangled above the murk of an unmarked term, the comp on Monday and our first tour of duty, sent off like soldiers, blazered, brogued and booked. One last gulp of freedom, we spiralled down through the estate, teetering on curbstone tightropes, tango in lampposts, drowning in the dryness of brick and concrete. At the shops we stopped to plunder pollies, pockets saddlebagged with suck and swan vestas, served with a scale and a shake of the head. Then we hopped the wall and crossed the os patch, ploughing each other to the mud and the muck. A rusting cob chobbled on cola cubes, fed cack-handed for fear of losing fingers. He followed us lazily until the tug of ancient chains whispered in the grass, no further. At the far end, we gave the fence a slip, ducked onto the cut at Toplock's edge, tell your mum I saved your life, stretched out along the bank for sticklebacks, eyes lasered, hands cupped like the paws of a cat. Then we stalked the towpath again, snaked through the old steelworks, looping half-enders like grenades, rattling rows of empty lockers, no reviving the machines we found, much as we tried. It was midday when we reached the pylon, proselytes drawn to a defrocked church spire, muted, heads bowed, we gawped at the picked clean carcass, dead dog bones in a wild grass grave, no sound save the reverent hum of wires. One last fire before home, we smoked to salmon sunset, mirrored in the water, the summer burning itself out and taking all the bridges. So this next one, again, I write a lot of things about the canal. I spend a lot of time on the canal, up and down on a motorbike. And years back, I used to spend a lot of time whizzing up and down on what we called a chicken chaser. For anybody who doesn't know what a chicken chaser is, it's basically a clap-tape motorbike of any real description that the kids will take off-road, normally the canals, and just race up and down on. My own chicken chaser of kind of choice was an Honda 90 or 50. And if you don't know what a Honda 90 or 50 is, think of a poor man's kind of Vespa, and you've got, you know, sort of the idea there. But this is ode to the chicken chaser. It's 86 or 7, and we tear-arsing it down the cut on a clapped-out Honda 90. The chicken chaser of choice for the more discerning black country yam. 0 to 50-ish in 3 minutes flat. Ripsate and Boss headlamp come as standard, and we love's young dream. The open towpath stretched out before us. Me and this wench from the lost city whose name I can never recall. And she drops a fag and screams, grabs me tighter with every rut and bump, so I find them all, do I? We race trains along the main line, high on the buzz of a wagged off morning and petrol. Yeah, this is called Borders. It's another poem. I don't know whether Rob recalls this, but Rob used to be my lecturer, and it was Rob that kind of switched me on to writing about place and things like that, and everything sort of, as much as I'd travelled along the canals on a mountain bike and had all these kind of ideas, it was Rob that helped me put those into kind of words and you know, let me know that there was a kind of an audience for that kind of thing, whereas I was just coming up with ideas and not really putting anything out there. Rob took us on a trip to the Botanical Gardens in Birmingham, which is an absolutely fantastic place, and I'd recommend it to anybody. But at the time, I remember cycling to the Botanical Gardens and just thinking, I can't wait to get back along the canal and, you know, see what's down there and the kind of nature that was there. So this is a kind of about that kind of experience. It's called Borders, and if you do get the chance to go to the Botanical Gardens, please visit. Don't listen to this poem. Borders. These gardens are a Amazonite, a gemstone sewn into the fabric of the city, tailor-made and neatly stitched. This is nature dressed up, gentrified, a place for everything, but everything out of place. So I'm picking at the seams, pulling on threads, unravelling these manicured lawns and pristine pathways, drifting, mind's eye soaring above fences, crossing borders, a bird, no wing-clipped macaw, caged within a cage within a cage, but a magpie flying free, airborne over Harborne, with its pleated streets and leafy avenues, drifting further, out towards the Rotunda, an unlit candle on the Birmingham skyline, Birmingham grey, past the cold, unblinking eye of the New Street station, haloing St Michael's of the sacred shopping malls and the threadbare stalls of the rag market, further still, to the cracked and calloused hand of the city, tucked in a sleeve, frayed at the edges, where canals become the cut, and the ghosts of our great-grandfathers and grandmothers rise from the water, clocking on in abandoned factories, where dead nettle and butterbur do business, and a rebellion of brambles threaten violence. These weeds conspire, plotting unkempt empires, hostile takeovers, whispering in the wind, an ultimatum. You're either with us or against us. I'm going to just share one more. Sorry, this is another bit of prose, and this was included in New Mag's, or the New Mag, which was Newman's University's creative writing magazine, and they described it as, I think they said something like very weird, but in a good way. And I thought, I'll kind of take that. Yeah, I like that. So this is called Ghost of Digbeth. It's another piece of prose, and it's not so much Black Country. It's more of Birmingham based, obviously being in Digbeth, but I've always thought of Digbeth as a kind of honorary member or place in the Black Country anyway. So Ghost of Digbeth. It starts under the arches, a conduit, each barrel chamber a wireless, tuned to its own peculiar frequency, funneling present to past, digital to analog. I stop at the edge of a recess, breathe out, listen. This one transmits the free jazz of chucking out, a medley of school night revellers from the Rainbow spilling onto Lower Trinity Street. As they trickle towards the city centre, the crackle and hiss of conversation drifts out of range. Laughter and the stylish scratch of stilettos fade to a lost signal, static, switched off by the solemn click of a pub door deadbolt. All that remains is the faint, wheezy lullaby from the factories and warehouses up ahead. Somewhere in the distance, a sleepless machine kisses its teeth. I was listening to that. After dark, Digbeth is a two-faced district, split down the middle by the viaduct. Place an eye at alternate ends of each oversized keyhole, and you can see the countenance of both. The main drag won't be seen without makeup, dressed to the nines in bright lights and the cheap scent of 24-hour takeaways, always coming or going with her taxi ranks and all-night coach station. On the other side of the tracks, colours are filtered to monochrome, neon to gaslight. Her features are buried in the shadows, sunken-eyed, hollow-cheeked, a dark circle of disused factories and warehouses and scrapyards. At evening rush hour, the layers of traffic and parked cars are wiped clean. Fly posters peel from the walls like the cracked print of an old black metal t-shirt, but otherwise This half of Digbeth sleeps naked, at least as much as any part of a city like this ever truly sleeps. She twitches and murmurs. Her murals stretch and flex in the moonlight. This is who I'm here to see, why I keep coming back. The rails above me begin to sing with the approach of a late night train. I watch the glow as it glides across the viaduct, a flat line, getting closer, louder, until it rumbles overhead. Singing rails become a knife on a whetstone. There's a glitch of electricity. The smell of ozone hangs in the air. A soft rain fizzes through the bell jar light of the street lamp. Damp bricks shine like old bruises. I trace the edges with my fingertips, then place my hand flat against the wall, skin on skin, and the city shivers, or shudders, or trembles. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you very much, Lee Armstrong, everyone. Any publishers or agents watching, you can get in touch with me if you want Lee's details. Brilliant, absolutely amazing writer. And from one amazing writer to another, my second special guest for this evening needs very little introduction. He's been a mentor to me and to many others for a long, long time, even though he's only 29. He's an award-winning poet, novelist, flash fiction writer, and literary critic. He is, of course, the brilliant Dr. Paul MacDonald.
Cheers, Rob. I'd like to add my congratulations to Lee's on the publication of your new novella, Novella in Flashes. I can't wait to read it. It's anything like it's anything like Bella, it'll be fantastic. I'm going to read a few flash fictions, mercifully short. The first one was inspired, I suppose, by my career at the University of Wolverhampton. I taught at the University of Wolverhampton for 25 years, and I loved every single second of it. But the thing I liked least about it was the fact that I was always being made to switch offices. And this is about that annoyance. I'm going to put my spectacles on so that I get it right. It's called The University Site Manager in Charge of Offices. The only thing I remember about my first office was the memo I received instructing me to vacate it. That was the 1980s, before email. The memo was fixed over my name on the door with a drawing pin, signed simply, the University Site Manager in Charge of Offices. I'd just been awarded my PhD, and I was so proud that the name on the door said Doctor that I photographed it for my mother. I can't recall how long I occupied the office, or its size, decor, or furnishings. All I can see when I think of it is that memo. It was the first of countless memos asking me to leave many subsequent offices over the years. The next 6 or 7 memos arrived in brown envelopes left in my pigeonhole. But by the mid-90s, they began arriving by email. They were now called work instructions, issued by order of the University Site Manager in Charge of Offices. It seemed that as soon as I managed to settle into a new office, an email arrived giving notice to quit. Boxes would be made available for transporting books, stickers for labelling office equipment, and bags for disposing of confidential waste. I soon learned that it was futile to ask why we needed to move offices so frequently. The site managers just responded with phrases like creatively reconfiguring existing space or exploring ergonomic potentialities. In more recent years, the site manager developed a sense of humour. They began prefacing emails with phrases like brace yourself or hold on to your mortarboards. They also started using emoticons and signing off with terms such as bye-zy-bye or don't go changing. I thought the latter ironic, as the single thing that never changed was the site manager's own office, principally because they didn't have one. They just seemed to exist in the ether. There was never anyone tangible around to punch. Countless times I've forgotten my office location and wandered the corridors bewildered, or returned to a former office only to discover it occupied by someone other than me. Each move hurt a little more than the last. Since retiring, my memories of work fade by the day. I was a lecturer who once knew a lot about something very specific, though it scarcely seems to matter what. Memory of students also fade, colleagues too, except the memory of the colleague I never met. I sometimes wonder if it was a person at all. It was probably different people over the span of my career, or perhaps a committee. Perhaps it was a job title rather than a humane human entity. In the early years, my colleagues and I would joke that the university site manager in charge of offices was like God. But after a while, we stopped. The next one is like a lot of stories by writers who spend a lot of time in Starbucks. It's set in Starbucks, and it's called Receipts. It's been over a fortnight since I saw her in Starbucks, neglecting her latte and fiddling with shopping receipts. She seemed to have dozens of them and was searching for more, producing them like a magician from her bag, her purse, her pockets, and placing them on the table before her. Unfolding each in turn, she'd smooth them out and stack them into a neat pile. The woman reminded me strongly of my first serious girlfriend, Jenny Beard, or how I guessed Jenny Beard might look 30 years on from our split. She had similar large brown eyes that I used to call Jenny's bush baby eyes. This woman's interest in receipts was as hard to ignore as her eyes. Whenever a table near hers became empty, she'd scurry over to check if they'd left a receipt and add it to her pile. I even noticed her retrieve one that fluttered down from a tray as a waitress passed by. Who knows what she had in mind for them? She sat with the thickening pile before her on the table, as if preparing for the world's weirdest tarot reading. After a while, I came to feel that this woman could actually be Jenny Beard. The likeness was so striking. She and I had been together for almost a year as teenagers, and we were deeply in love. It had been a great, fulfilling affair until Jenny began to neglect herself. She gained weight and cut her hair into a style that I found a bit odd, and I found her increasingly unattractive. Eventually, I proposed a break. She didn't take it well. She began phoning me in tears, sometimes screaming hysterically. She even punched a girl that she thought I'd been seeing. It was a very difficult time. Fortunately, Jenny gradually recovered. She lost the weight, refashioned her hair, and eventually left town. When my wife and I divorced last year, I searched for Jenny Beard on Facebook, but none of the Jenny Beards I found had bush baby eyes. Yet this receipt lady did, and as I watched her assemble her heap, unfolding and stacking, I became convinced that it was her. Jenny Beard, my Jenny Beard, had grown into a woman weirdly obsessed with receipts. How did that happen? With my coffee gone, it was time to move on, but I had a dilemma. I wanted to say hello, but how should I phrase it? Remember me, Jenny Beard? What's with all the receipts? They certainly couldn't be ignored. And what did her strange obsession say about her? Was she merely eccentric, or was it something darker? Either way, approaching her might be awkward. If she turned out to be nuts, there might be a scene. I could easily become embroiled in something embarrassing. I was turning these matters over in my mind when Jenny Beard approached my table. I braced myself for something uncomfortable. Perhaps she'd recognise me, despite my thinning hair and middle-aged spread. She didn't seem to, however, and merely nodded at the receipt that lay beside my coffee mug. "Excuse me," she said, "may I have your receipt, please?" Up close, I could see that there was no mistake. It was Jenny Beard. Her voice was familiar, soft yet assured, and her bush baby eyes were as warm, wide and gentle as they'd been 30 years before. I continued to gaze at her, and she asked me again. "If it's no bother," she said, "I'd like your receipt, please." "May I ask you why you're collecting them?" I queried, deciding not to reveal my identity at this stage. I didn't want to take a chance on a potential crazy woman. It turns out that she collected receipts to distribute to homeless people. They contained the door code for the Starbucks toilet, and there were no other public facilities for the homeless to use in the town centre. Obviously, they couldn't afford to eat and drink at Starbucks, so she retrieved customer receipts on their behalf. I was impressed by her reasons, and in the light of this explanation, felt it safe to disclose my identity. In fact, I was quite excited. Jenny had matured into a very attractive woman. I've been thinking about it for a fortnight now, but I still can't decide why she claimed not to know me, or refused to admit that her name was Jenny Beard. When I insisted, she backed away, and when I pursued her, she alerted the staff, which I thought was a bit of an overreaction. When I stood my ground, they threatened to phone the police. I'm ashamed to say that I punched one of the baristas who escorted me from the premises. One can only assume that Jenny Beard was determined to make me pay. One more to go. And this is about a weird event that took place last summer. It's called Every Horse in the World. In April, every horse in the world suddenly sprouted wings and began to fly. It still feels weird saying that, and to think that Pam and I watched it happen. It was the first warm day of the year, and we were drinking coffee on the patio when a chevron of low-flying thoroughbreds darkened the sky over our house. The downdraft from their wings shook blossom from the apple tree. Pam screamed, and our Cairn terrier Treacle leapt from my lap, yapping herself into a frenzy. Social media soon teemed with video clips of similar sights from around the globe. Millions of horses rising through the skies, from herds to individual beasts, some dragging carts and coaches behind them, riders swinging from stirrups. Radar tracked clouds of them through the troposphere, stratosphere, exosphere, and out into the infinite dark. Within hours, the whole equine genus was gone, including donkeys and zebras. For days, we did nothing but watch experts theorizing on TV. There were interviews with equine geneticists, zoologists, and ornithologists, interviews with philosophers, theologians, and politicians, interviews with astronomers, astrophysicists, and horse whisperers, but no answers. In September, Pam and I were back on the patio for the first time since the Exodus. We sat with Treacle, sipping our coffee and thinking back to the weirdest day in our lives, and in everyone's. The whole world wondered if the equine flight heralded more strange phenomena. It hadn't, but there was constant speculation about which species might be next. I was conscious of Treacle's weight on my lap. I had my hands on her shoulders and couldn't help anticipating that twitch of bone, muscle, or fur that might presage a sprouting of wings, doubting it would happen, but knowing that it could. I noticed Pam looking thoughtfully at Treacle, and I asked her thoughts. I expected her to say something deep, perhaps about animals being wiser than humans or closer to something we've forgotten. But she just laughed and said, "What's the point of thinking?" I shrugged, laughed too, but stopped when Treacle started to yap. And the more she yapped, the more it resembled a wild, fierce joy. That's when the future really began, in the presence of the joy that condemned us. I thank you.
Thank you very much. That's Paul MacDonald, everyone. And that brings us nicely back full circle to the Wrenna. So I'm going to share a little bit from this new book of mine. Before I do that, I just want to say a few thank yous to Phil and Tracy Scott Townsend from Wild Pressed Books for their help and encouragement, in particular Tracy for her absolutely incredible editing mind and eagle eye. I've learned a lot from her, and it's been a really wonderful working with Wild Press Books again. This book is also dedicated to my grandfathers, my dad, and my brother, who I see as men of strength and grace. So I'm going to give you the first few pages of the Wrenna, and then I'm going to skip forward without any spoilers to close to the end. This first section is called The Lay. It's the wren's nest, part housing estate, part nature reserve. It's the Wrenna to us. Frog spawn slicks in silica sheets across green pool. Carrion crow calls. The fox's den, too close to the road. Vixens crushed against tarmac. Limestone cliffs weathered by prehistoric waves. The underground caves. The fenced off caverns. The canal lines that vein through. Rabbits, badgers, weasels, and rusted cans and cigarette butts and fly-tipped sacks and discarded clothes and the stained knickers of a fallen wench. Limes, acorn, hawthorn, bluebell, and stinky wild garlic. Bell pits, old mine shafts, and geological tools. Dog walkers amble through slippery tributaries of homemade paths. Rope swinging kids up a height in the oaks. The silence, the almost silence, the rhizomes that pierce through earth's hymen and tangle. Conjugate. None of this is metonym. This land is where we live, the Wrenna. Here's where they dug into the earth and pulled out a giant trilobite, the Dudley bug. Not a metonym. The streets orbit the woods, not as a symbol, literally. Terraces clad in cobblestones and red brick meander, side stream, feed, branch, in swirls around the pull of the woods. The estate eddies the woods. Grandson lives with his brood 3 streets down from Nan, who took the cousin's house and now lives 3 up from our auntie. She's been there for 3 generations, and the kids will have it after 2. And John and Wendy are 2 doors up from her sister, and their Babs are just through the alley next to our kid, who used to live with her best friend at school, and she's only a stone's throw from her grandson. Every bloodline webs the Wrenna like this. You say don't walk through here at night. You say to be careful, avoid us, but we're here. Like the frog spawns sticking to the film of algae, we are cells sucking at light, stunned in our own kind of beauty. Foxglove Road. In the springtime, the moon still thinks it's night when we went to school. Juno Hutton, get your arse in this house at once, called Mother Hutton. Her yawp echoed out through the crisscross streets, bounced off the pebble dash terraces and into the woods, all through the underground caves that make up the Wrenna. She stood at the bottom of the street, hands on hips, calls out across the Wren's Nest Road, up and over the bonk and into the trees. You'll starve and have a charred tay, Juno Hutton. It'll go to the whammel if you weigh back in 10. We all knew it was time for tea when we heard that call. I'd been tadpoling down Green Pool when I heard it. The racket made me spill the jar over the grasses, all those black speckled half beings wriggling and gasping, jutting and juttering on the grass as their brown water soaked into the earth. I scooped as many up as I could, launched them back into the pond. The birds had started circling before I even made it to the path. That's where she was, coming the other way. Juno. The paths are narrow through the woods. I waved to let her go first. My eyes bowed. Cheers, she said. She spoke to me. I didn't look up. It was only a few seconds, or maybe she waited for me. I had to catch my breath and I had to stop myself from gasping, and my face was cold and the sun blared through the beaches onto my sweating neck. I'm sure she was looking at me. Say hello. Don't say hello. That's Juno Hutton, you moron. Say something. That's your mum, mate? I asked. It is, I goes mad if the tay's burnt. Juno, ain't? That's me. Who am you? Juno was in year 10. I was still a year 8. Everyone knew her. She was the first name everyone learned at school. She lived in the next street across from me, Foxglove Road. We followed her home sometimes. I looked down at my feet, filthy from the muddy edges of Green Pool, the bottom of my jeans mud-caked. Even my hands were dirty, laced in slime that had started to get sticky in the sun. Who am you then? She asked again. She studied me. She tried to get the measure of my eye that sat slightly too far back in their sockets and were framed with dark rings. I raised my head from my hands, but only as far as her tits. They were huge, round, fleshy mounds packed into a school blouse, a tie dropping gently between them. She'd had tits since Wren's Nest Primary, but now, Jesus. Dirty little shit, she said and strutted off. I went hot and cold and hot and shivery and wanted to laugh and cry and fall over and throw a stone at her and try and catch her up and tell her my name, and maybe we'd get to like each other and she might fancy a younger guy like me, and I was hungry and my stomach was in knots and I was sweating, and maybe she might want to come to mine for tea sometime, and maybe, I don't know. As she strode out down the path towards the houses, she dropped something, a fist of flowers, pink bells. I picked them out of the hawthorn. I still have those flowers from the woods. I pressed the pink petals in a copy of the Ladybird book of Custer's Last Stand. I picked them out from the hawthorn. I got a graze or a splinter or a sting or something. I sucked at it, forgot about the tadpole mucus slicked over my hands. Dirty little shit, I whispered. I smiled, gave my fingers another taste. And then finally, Linwood Road. Last time I saw Juno, she was walking back from the pub. I still had those flowers from the woods. I'd pressed the pink petals in the copy of the Ladybird book of Custer's Last Stand. You still notice her all these years on. She was wearing one of those skin-tight dresses with the fluorescent Aztec patterns. It clung to every curve and framed her tight flesh in cello lines. You still notice her. She was hammered that night, zigzag walking, hiccups. I was heading up the road and she was heading back. We met on the corner of Linwood Road, just where it curves around into the woods, up and over Mons Hill. I stood aside to let her pass. Dirty little shit, she said with a smile. I laughed. How do, Juno? I asked. You know very well how I do, she said. She looked me up and down, pursed her lips, and her hips rolled slightly as she shimmied past me. There was a slight arch of her back and she pushed her tits out, then straightened again. I smiled at that and it made my head go tight again, and I felt hot and cold and sticky-handed, and maybe I should follow her and maybe it'd be tender and fierce all over again. A few drops of sweat dripped from my pits and brow, that twitch, and I tasted the vodka and the sauerkraut and the itching again. We looked at each other for a second. She looked me right in the eye, the corners of her mouth curled up, eyebrow raised. She had a life, our Juno. She'd done things, but she always looked tough and she always looked gorgeous. And that night, she looked happy too. Good night, Juno. Tara a bit bab. Juno said she liked to dance, so when we'd both left school, I took her out one night. This was between Lee and getting back with Polish Pete. We went to the cut down by the Black Country Museum. We kissed. It was only once and it was just a kiss. Then we danced a bit and she made me promise not to tell anyone. We held each other and rocked to and fro and she kissed me. I made her promise not to tell too. I still thought of her now and I cried. I'd buy her flowers and I'd throw them in the cut where we'd kissed and danced. Aussies grazed on the grass down there, and in their eyes you could see fear and silence. They were powerful and pathetic. It's where the carriageway runs up and over the old bridges and ripples the brown water. Commuters pass through every hour of the day, and I wonder if they see the eyes of Juno who liked to dance and kissed me. Not long after I saw her that last time, Juno was in the Dudley news, face battered and bruised, lips and nose swelled up. She was bloated by the beating and they told us no one saw a thing. We stopped getting the free paper a week later. That was just before Polish Pete got picked up by the police. He was a big bloke, Pete, and he'd served in the Polish army. He'd said it was the Gran or something. Juno had told him about the attack. He'd marched a few of his mates down Linwood Road and met a group of the ex-prisoners who sort of patrolled the streets and the little entrances into the woods, those gangs. Pete got 10 years for GBH and the judge had taken into account his special army training, so we wouldn't be seeing him for some time. That was the last time I said Juno. I still had those flowers from the woods. I'd pressed the pink petals into the copy of the Ladybird book of Custer's Last Stand. Thank you very much. This is the Wrenna. It's out now with Wild Press Books and available from all good bookshops. I'd like to thank everybody again for tuning in. It means a lot to me to see your names, if not your faces. And again, huge thanks to my muckers, Lee and Paul, for joining me. Lee Armstrong and Paul McDonald. Thanks very much, guys.
Okay, good luck with the book, Rob. And Lee and Paul, thank you so much. It's just really wonderful to hear you again. Coming up tomorrow at 4 p.m. is a webinar on British Art Show 9 and socially engaged art. And it's a discussion with curator Hamad Nassar, who is co-curating the British Art Show 9. And this is the biggest touring exhibition of contemporary art in the UK. And it's coming to Wolverhampton in January 2022. You can book this talk for free on Eventbrite, and thanks for watching. See you all soon.